I want to welcome you all. This is the second effort that we've made to present a little bit of training. We're again focusing on marriage. Last month we presented the fundamentals of premarital counseling and marriage mentoring and program development. I acknowledge that it's a brief exposure, 1 hour. I want to draw your attention later in a slide. I want to mention it now, so I mention it several times. At www.edencounseling.com, the website you see here, we either have up or we'll get up today a program, or you received a link somewhere online. I obviously haven't thought this through. Is the 4-session marriage counselor training we did in Timișoara this year. And so it is for those of you from Romania, translated to Romanian. And Mirabella, my assistant, is in Timișoara today. She hasn't signed in yet. Her plan is to sign in, and I'll have her clarify specifically where it's at, and we will also include that in a follow-up email to you. You will be receiving very shortly after the conclusion of this meeting a survey in your email to complete, and we would love to have you do that. Your feedback will be very helpful. So we'll proceed through. I have to figure something out here. Technically, I'm dealing with some issues. I've got it now. Using GoToMeeting alters the commands in my laptop. Most of the names I recognize that have signed in. We may have some other people signing in, but we have guests from Romania. We have guests, local guests from southeastern Virginia. Welcome, everyone. And I am, a couple slides I'll just run through. Those of you that know me know this anyway. I have a long heritage in my family of people who served very actively in the church as pastors, missionaries, teachers, leaders. I've been married for 38 years. We celebrate that in 2 weeks. I just turned 60 years of age, so I've joined the geriatric crowd, and I'm glad to be here. Just a brief view of mission statements as we introduce ourselves. Mine's a little tongue-in-cheek, I really believe that sometimes we make choices that are based on what is best, not on what we feel. So if we know who we truly are and live as if we truly believe, we'll be doing pretty well. And then the Counseling Center and the Institute are two organizations that I run as well. I'm not going to spend much time on this either. This is a little bit of history of the development of Eden Counseling. And we're currently involved in Romania, and we made our 3rd trip this year. We'll be coming again next July, predominantly teaching, but we're also looking to empower some startup ongoing ministries and assist in mentoring of leaders. This is the current structure of Eden Counseling on site in southeastern Virginia. We serve about 700 families a week, and God appears to have us in a kind of a growth mode right now, so it's a very dynamic time for us. What we're doing today is we'll do an overview of what I consider disasters in marriage. They're those things that really have a negative outcome. I'm likely to speak through a structured outline for somewhere in the neighborhood of 45 minutes. It might even be shorter. You are welcome at any time to make a question or a comment. You'll see an icon for chat, and all you have to do is type a message in there. Cornell has typed "Hello, everyone." You can all see that. And so just to illustrate, I also respond. So you can dialogue like that. If you can unmute and ask a question at any time, that's perfectly permissible. And we will definitely have time at the end to discuss some of the concepts we've been talking about. Again, there's the website. Resources and handouts that relate to this overview are there. I really think if you can take the time to go through the 4-session marriage counseling, and if you haven't seen the previous session and today's session, it'll start coming together for you in a practical way, I think. So when I'm giving a discussion, I often want to define my terms. I'm sorry, I have allergies. And this room that I'm in does pass natural air through, and uh, and I sometimes cough. So something such as a flood, tornado, fire, plane crash, etc., that happens suddenly and causes much suffering or loss to many people. That's a fairly standard disaster definition. So this is just disasters in general. Something that has a very bad effect or result, or a complete or terrible failure. So a marriage disaster may include any of those things pertaining to the relationship of the couple. So this is my definition. And then later I'm going to take the one we just saw and weave some marital things in it. And it has to do with perception. Disaster, one person's disaster is not necessarily another person's disaster when it comes to relationships, but anything that alters the perceived identity, and that's the key word here. People have difficulty incorporating things that affect their sense of self. Going back to the natural disaster metaphor, I was in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. Uh, by anyone's definition, a huge disaster, politically, economically, relationally, loss of life, loss of property. And I saw some people who were absolutely numb, absolutely devastated, and others who were not. And that's when I began conceptualizing this idea of how much is your identity affected. So people that feel like they've lost everything when their house washes away and when their goods are gone, their identity was defined in part by their environment. Uh, Ideologically, we would love to believe that our identity is solidly in Christ and nothing else matters, but we know we are all affected by the relationships around us. So this identity perception, that's a key principle I want us to be talking about. So it's the identity of the marriage, the family, or one of the spouses in a manner that one or both spouses perceives as disastrous or irrecoverable. And I'm going to tell a very personal story illustrating this in just a few minutes. So marital disasters, as I've been defining them, predict divorce with 80 to 90% probability in the United States. In other words, in the U.S. culture, people are ill-equipped to deal with marital disasters. This is found all throughout research. And those of you that have engaged numerous people in our culture, you'll know this to be true. Now, some of the things that are 90% predictors of divorce one is obvious. Adultery predicts divorce 90% of the time. Death of a child predicts divorce 90% of the time, and a successful gastric bypass surgery, which is a reduction of the size of the stomach, causing or contributing to a significant change in relationship with food, resulting in a much smaller body. Now, if you look at all these things, they're very different. Gastric bypass surgery, you would say, well, what's that got to do with the end of something? But it has to do with identity, and that is the theme. So in adultery, two or one steps out of bounds, we've altered the identity of the marriage and my sense of identity with the spouse if I am the one who was faithful and the other faithless. So my experience of you has changed. It affects my experience of me, and I don't see any way to make this better. Death of a child alters the identity of the family. And some of these things I mentioned, just so you as leaders are aware of this. You may be in a culture where adultery is not talked about, so it doesn't come to the forefront as to what you have a knowledge of. Death of a child is inescapable in terms of knowing that it's happened, that it's present, and it's useful for a leader, a counselor, a pastor, a teacher to just know this that this family facing a disaster that anyone would understand, but that it threatens the marriage is the key here. And the gastric bypass surgery has to do with the change of the identity of the individual. I am different. I had a couple, and this is proven true in my practice. Recovery from gastric bypass surgery of people who have been clients has often led to divorce. So as you join us, if you would mute your microphone, that would be helpful. Those of you that are joining us, and you're welcome. I'm so glad you're here. But if you could mute your microphone, then we will. It just retains an environment of silence until it's time to talk. And so, for those of you that have joined us, you're welcome to chat. There is an opportunity to a little chat box to type a message, and you're welcome to turn your microphone on and ask a question at any time during the presentation. And we have a mixture of peoples here. We have Romanians, we have Americans, and so English may not be your first language. Please don't let that keep you from asking questions. I love diverse perspectives and cultural influence, and when we're working together. So these are three things that are 90% predictive of divorce. Now, this list here represents other things that may predict divorce with variable rates. The presence of abuse, the discovery of addiction or the ongoing addiction. It could be biochemical, it could be uh, monetary, could be any number of other kinds of things. Um, uh, and Theft, embezzlement of private funds. When somebody goes to jail, that opens the door for any number of problems, poverty, um, and radical changes in values and behavior. I'm going to tell a personal story about. And we know from research with war and acts of war that that in an area that experiences terrorism, war, divorce goes up, as well as a whole lot of other social problems, addictions, abuses, um, mental illness goes up. And so the U.S. has experienced a couple of significant acts that have affected thousands of people. We are still blessed to not live in areas like the Middle East, where this is a daily reality for some people's groups. So I just wanted you to be aware of the kinds of things that that you tend to observe that they're happening in the group that you serve, to be aware that marriages are at risk. So now I'm back to the first definition of disaster, but instead of talking about floods and so on, this is how it might read if we insert marital kinds of things. So something such as the discovery of adultery or an addiction, theft, deception, or death of a loved one, or extreme stress, including war and terrorism, that happens suddenly and causes much suffering or loss to the marriage. So now I'm mixing these two definitions. The second definition, something that has that very bad effective result, and gastric bypass surgery, even when successful, has a bad impact on the relationship. A complete or terrible failure. Um, it is not unusual for people to go through periods of neglect of their relationship, uh, um, to not pay attention to the marriage, to not spend time in the marriage, and then the marriage loses credibility, a sense of identity. So I'm going to tell you a story. Some of you know of bits and pieces of this story. Illustrative, very personal, was very informative to me personally and professionally. Um, and it took place over a couple of years, but I just learned about it about 14 months ago when we got a panicked phone call from my son who said his wife had not appeared home that night. And that began a series of conversations that we had with him that led to the demise of his marriage and a new formation of identity in a young man who was thrust into the crises of what we call midlife. And I'll elaborate on this at a very young age. So we had had none of this in my family. My siblings, except for my younger brother, he was the first to have a divorce. But the vast majority of my siblings, of previous generations, divorce was not a possibility. But my son's wife had apparently publicly denounced her faith a year before we knew about it. My son foolishly agreed to keeping silence about several issues that she did not want to be made public. And so her denouncing her faith, her engaging in a culture with high alcohol content, um, were the precursors to the adultery that led to the divorce. And one of the significant points from this presentation is when people are in isolation, it doesn't work out. And so my son foolishly allowed himself to be isolated from us, from his friends. Though there were friends locally who were concerned, they would get together, things were changing. But the point lower, 6 hours a day of counseling, encouraging, this is what I learned from this, that even though I've been a counselor for over 30 years, even though I've guided many, many parents and couples through marital crises and divorce, I didn't appreciate how much personal attention it takes to help somebody cope well. And this son who happened to have been afflicted with this is a very communicative person. He's a very competent adult. And he, once he had told us the very first part of this, we became part of his core support. And for the first month, once they had formally separated, once he learned that there had been adultery, he moved out. And we were on the phone with him between my wife and I, and she is also a professional, 6 hours a day, counseling and encouraging. And I've never in my life engaged anyone that intensely or so personally. So this was, God allowed us to have a real education in what it takes to help people through. And so one of the points of why I want to do this presentation is to have you be thinking about what forms the identity of a family, what are the things that threaten it, and exactly how much support does it take to see people through a disaster. And the bottom line is it's more than you think. It may be more than you want to provide, and that's why we need a community. We need to raise up a community of people that can support people going through disasters. And my son has this. He has very good friends. He was raised in a culture of very competent people from when he was a little boy. So he has friends that in his life of his age group, men and women, going back for 20 years. And they have stood by him with his family to see him through this. And he's still not a full year out from the divorce. He is still having what we call anniversary reactions. And this is another thing to be aware of. I don't think I put it in a slide, but after a disaster, there are points where the emotions get stirred up, memories get stirred up, and one of those points are anniversaries. So if we're dealing with adultery, there will be anniversaries of discovery when you first found out. There will be anniversaries of when you learned it began, anniversaries of your own life together. So my son, who's divorced, is experiencing grief on birthdays, holidays. His wedding anniversary is next week. I am intending to engage him in a discussion of the grief that he will have as he just passes this marker. And his divorce will have been finalized the end of August. And so what I've been telling him from the beginning is you will need a year to do some basic recovery, 3 to 6 months of acute grief, significant work, and then another 6 months until you're going to start feeling like you're on your own feet and life has purpose and meaning. He wisely he's chosen not to date. One of the things that we had the privilege of saying to him as soon as this news broke out was you don't get to drink excessively, you don't get to run around, you don't get to go crazy, you don't get to spend all your money. We're going to help you cope with this because all those things are simply designed to help you avoid your pain, avoid your grief, and that doesn't work. And so if you're helping people through disasters, you need to be well grounded in concepts of grief, the simple grief processes, which I'm not going to go into great detail today, but going back to Kubler-Ross's research with cancer patients, denial, sadness, anger, bargaining, and acceptance. And so these 5 points were part of our regular discussion, still are. And my son, who's very bright, quickly grasped these constructs and so was able to communicate with us. I think I was bargaining today. I think I was telling God, if only you would do this and I would do that, maybe this would work out. And maybe I was bargaining with her father when I was saying, if you would speak to her in this way, maybe this would work out. The sorrow and the anger are unmistakable. They're easy to identify when people are feeling that. And I say to people, acceptance doesn't mean you like it. It means that you've reached a place where you can see tomorrow, where you can see yourself moving forward. And there may be a whole lot of work ahead, but you've successfully grieved the past, so you've let go of what was, and you're ready to face today and tomorrow. And so these discussions we've been having with my son, who is a poster child for doing this right, really doing this well. And another discussion we had, he was 29 when he learned that his wife was committing adultery. And so early on I said to him, you have been thrust prematurely into a midlife crisis. At least that's what we call it. Which usually happens for men between 38 and can be anywhere 38 to 55, women 34 to 55. And it's a place where you've hit a wall. Something just isn't going well, and you question, who am I? Who am I really? Who is going to love me, and what am I going to do with myself, which has to do with identity, relationship, and career for most people, or ministry, or something meaningful. And so my son's been going through this. He began exploring geographic moves, changing companies, because he was predominantly there geographically for his wife, whose family, who grew up there. God has kept him in place. God has given him tremendous support, and he's making great progress. He has learned a lot about marital conflict, about healthy marriage, about what he wants out of life, and he's been able to maintain a very grateful attitude in spite of the horror relationally that he's been experiencing. He also has to face his contribution to the dead marriage, and he's doing that. He was neglectful of certain things, some of which he didn't know how to attend to, but he's learning how to be a better husband. And we are praying for when God provides a spouse, that it will be what God wants to have happen in his life. Um, so we still have 2 to 3 contacts a week with this son. So I just wanted to share you this, that anyone can be affected by this. This happens to be the adultery route. Someone chose to pursue a life 180 degrees opposite of how she was raised, how she appeared when she was married, but a number of circumstances, a number of unresolved issues led to a different kind of life, incompatible with staying married to a man who has Christian faith, Christian values, and wants to move forward serving the Lord. So we've experienced this. You all know somebody, if you're American, who has experienced this. And we will be seeing an increase in this in Romania, because that's, as media affects culture, that's how these things go. So and I'm not presenting this to be predicting some kind of horrible thing for the people you work with or your families. We just have to see things for what they are and have strategies for how to deal with them as we move forward. And one of those strategies is a theological perspective that allows us to embrace trials. And one of the key passages for me that gets quoted daily to somebody is James 1, 2 through 4, which translates from the New International Version: "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds." This is a concept that people wrestle with. People have crises of faith because evil exists in the world, because something bad happened to someone that they think is good. And so the human perspective is that the just world kind of paradigm. If you do well, you should be well treated. If you do badly, you should be punished. And the fact of the matter is, life is what it is. Christ says rain falls on the just and the unjust. And here we have in James an interesting phrase in this translation. And I don't know how we've taught this in Romanian. I forget some of the nuances, but it's "consider it pure joy" in English, which doesn't mean that you're having a good time. But it's an act of the will. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds. The testing of your faith produces perseverance, which is one of the fruit of the Spirit. This links to core values that Paul was presenting as character. As we're walking with Lord, the fruit of the Spirit includes perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. So if we look at this verse in terms of what are God's values, God is less interested in me having a good time than he is in developing perseverance, maturity, and therefore godly character. And I do believe that people with godly character, connected to other people of godly character, if you look at the last line, lack nothing. I do not believe in self-containment, personal gain, value in controlling certain things myself. I believe I am extremely rich in relationship, and that is what brings life tremendous value and meaning, which I'll talk about in just a minute. What does happiness look like? So this is a critical theological concept, that when trials come our way, it will produce value, and that's the message I gave to my son. I said, when you're finished with this, you will have grown. You will have learned about suffering. This will enhance your life and ministry and your capacity to both be a husband and a parent. And I absolutely believe that. We see the same thing in Romans. So Paul writes in Romans, we also glory in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. So he states the word hope. I have to insert it in the other passage when I'm talking to people, that we have great hope, not that we would avoid suffering. And there are some theologies that really believe that Christians should not suffer if we're doing everything right. It's the same just world mentality, but with different formulas based on different doctrine. But if we embrace this, which is really a central theme in Orthodox spiritual formation, then hope. We always have a sense of hope. God is doing something good in this, and therefore I have my hope. And hope does not put us to shame. So when you are suffering, you don't need to be ashamed of it. You don't need to hide it. You don't need to be like Adam and Eve and hide in the shrubbery and try to just disguise what you're ashamed of. It's okay to struggle, I think, in God's economy. And so I really want to see the church build culture in which it's okay to have flaws. Now we're gonna develop our capacity not to sin, but it's the shame contributes to isolation, which contributes to not growing. Because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has given to us, who has been given to us. So these are primary texts in this kind of work with people. Now, back to that list, certain things predict divorce. These are factors that affect the divorce. And isolation, I think, is the number one reason that people get divorced. I work a lot with people who have had committed adultery, and we see a huge number of successful resurrected marriages, totally restructured, total newness. And it takes a long time to do that. But isolation, not having people to challenge you, to speak encouragement, not knowing other people that have been through it, this is really important, that you can connect people to, you as leaders know your community, so you can connect people to other people who have survived this. So another factor is friends and family who encourage the divorce, and some of the harsh realities in terms of watching my son's story, and you're welcome to disagree with me in any of these facets, but when he explored the laws in Oklahoma, he discovered that there was no separation, there was no legal separation, and so that people who are technically married but living apart are responsible, are liable for the financial choices made by the other party. And this creates an almost necessary path to divorce in some circumstances. Without going into great detail, my son's wife was making incredibly bad financial decisions that he would be paying for years. And that, among other factors, led him to pursue the divorce, which ironically, then his family blamed him for the divorce. And so my son has been vilified for divorcing his adulterous wife, who has never looked back. She has made no hint at all. Now, you may disagree with the position I took as father, but I said to him, you certainly have my permission to pursue divorce under these conditions. So I wasn't encouraging divorce, but out of what I perceived to be the loving action of a father to supporting his son, I absolutely gave him, not that he needed my permission, but I gave him permission to leave an adulterous situation, as there was apparently no turning back. And it's been a year now and no evidence of any turning back. So even when he approached her about this, he said we could reunite, but under these current circumstances, we must divorce. New love interests. Childbirth in America, and I can only speak for America because that's the only research that I'm able to access. Childbirth in America predicts an increased risk of adultery, pregnancy, and post-childbirth. And one might argue, well, it's because sexuality is diminished and men are going to do what they're going to do. But I think it's bigger than that. I think it has to do with identity and the failure to incorporate another love interest, a child, in. And men who commit adultery will say, I felt jealous of my wife's attention. I felt jealous of the nurture that she gave to the child. And so bringing an adulterer into a marriage is a new love interest, but also bringing a child in is a new love interest in a different way, but it increases risk factors. Economic capacity to live apart increases divorce. I don't need him. I don't need her. I can live alone. In American culture, there's outside the church, there's almost no shame in divorce. Very, very different than 50 years ago, 100 years ago. And appropriate shame sometimes helps people stay for a little while longer. And then there's hedonism. America is an increasingly hedonistic culture, philosophically and practically speaking. And hedonists would measure everything by how it makes you feel. If it feels good, it's a good thing. And we began seeing this in our culture infiltrating from the 1960s in a very, very big way. And hedonism contrasts with happiness. And so I'm just going to take a few minutes to, and this may seem unrelated, but in terms of teaching people about life as they're coming out of crises, I think it's very significant. There are 5 elements that an American researcher who is, I don't think he's a Christian, his name's Martin Seligman. He's one of the most powerful psychologists in my field. And he's doing research on happiness. He's been doing it since 1998. And there are 5 elements that are measurable and teachable that have to do with this concept. And he doesn't even like the word happiness. It's sort of the easiest one to connect to. He really likes well-being better, a deep sense of satisfying well-being, being a good life. And so these things can be taught and pursued. The first 5 bullets on this slide: positive emotion. You have to have the capacity to feel good, and you have to do activities that create good feeling. But that's just the first one. That's sort of the obvious one. The second one is engagement of the mind. That is to do activities that are not what we call multitasking. We think about one thing at a time. We focus on one thing at a time. And my greatest stressors from an internal standpoint come when I have too much on my mind. And so I have intrusive, I have to do this, I have to remember that. And we are very much a culture of multitasking. So if I could see you all, I would ask you to raise your hand if you drive down the road watching a video on your overhead screen, texting, engaging in conversation with your neighbor while eating lunch, while driving your car. And believe me, I see people pretty close to that reality on the road, sometimes risk getting there myself. But what's happening is the attention is rapidly shifting from one thing to another. The brain is being forced to process a lot of information very quickly, and it's just stressful. And so when I go into my yard and I pick weeds in my garden, and that's all I think about. Weed picking I recommend as a calming activity. You have to discern weed from flower, so you have to engage the mind a little bit, but you don't have to think a lot. And you see a product when you're finished, and you've been outside in the sun, and so it can be good for the soul to go out and pick weeds. Metaphor, you can take that metaphor in a lot of directions too. But engagement of the mind is very important. Relationships are very important. Good, meaningful relationships and meaning in your life is very important. That you engage in a lot of activity that you find personally meaningful. From a career standpoint, pastors typically find that their work has great meaning, great relationship. When they're studying and preparing to speak, they have to engage their mind well. And so there is the potential for a lot of job satisfaction in the pastoral world. Achievement is both historic and forward-looking. So I have accomplished things in the past, and any of you that are educated, you've accomplished completion of a degree, you've accomplished a position of employment. If you're a pastor, you've accomplished growing your congregation to a certain point. So those are kind of obvious things. But sometimes you'll be working with people's lives. It's hard for them to find achievements. And so we help them with that. What is the character of your child? Sometimes we have to show people where they have achieved things and train them as where they can move forward. In our culture, we celebrate birthdays. We consider it an achievement to have lived another year. We celebrate marital anniversaries. And when I'm doing a marriage conference and we ask who's been married the longest, people always cheer and clap because in our culture, we all know how hard it is to get there, to that 45th, the 55th, the 65th year. So we take these five elements, and they, if you really have it all going in all five, you're going to say my life is good. And I can say to you all very honestly, right now my life is good. I like my life. I can also say to you very honestly, there have been times when I have not liked my life, where I have been low on every one of those. But God has, except for relationships, God has preserved me through difficult times through relationships, and I'm ever grateful for that. And it has shaped my work. You know, your personal experiences will shape your work, and that has shaped me. So when I look at these five, they are not hedonism. In fact, if you go to a YouTube and look up Martin Seligman, you'll see a number of videos that are placed there. There's a 7-minute video with an English from England uh, correspondent, and this fellow asks Dr. Seligman, "Now, isn't this a really selfish thing? All this talk about happiness?" And Dr. Seligman says, "No, not at all. In fact, if you're having a bad day, the single thing that you can do to make yourself feel better is to do something for somebody else." And so it really, so charity, which is a very highly valued Christian reality, it creates happiness. The reason that I'm going through all this with you now is that people going through a disaster often have lost hope of ever feeling well, doing well, being happy. And so one of the key elements of gratitude, we can't preach into them or demand it, but you can guide people to seeing points of gratitude. Getting back to my son, for example, uh, early on, he and I were talking, and he said, "You know, I sometimes feel," this is a reference to Monopoly for those of you that don't play this game. "I sometimes feel like I'm getting a get out of jail free card." Um, and then and then and then I learned that over the months, he was really concerned that his wife would be a competent mother. She wasn't doing well taking care of herself, nor contributing to the marriage, nor contributing to household management, nor the finances. And so even in the midst of his shock and denial, um, gratitude for what God was providing for him was the seeds were there. And so gratitude is something we have to sometimes gently take people to, but when I see it, I nourish it. So I had him, we talked about that, how God would preserve him and God would care for him. And this was not an act of God against him to punish him, but it would be used to train him. These are all realities that I think people need to be led through. And I apologize for that. So let's talk about counseling and how it uh, contributes to changing people, because counseling is not all that is needed in helping people with disasters by any stretch of the imagination. Um, and I was really impressed upon this. My first exposure to disaster was the Chernobyl incident in Russia back in the 80s. I was stationed in Stuttgart, Germany, and there was a disaster in Russia, and we had uniformed personnel and their families, army people and their families, vacationing, not far from there, not real close, not within the first area of fallout, but in an area that would be contaminated. So they evacuated them right away, and we established a center to do evaluations of them. We called it debriefing, the psychological part, which is important for all disasters. So we had a team, and we brought people out, and we talked to them about their experience. We asked them what they knew, what they understood, what they expected, where they had errors in thinking. We corrected that, and really, this group was fine. They knew of the incident. They got out. As far as I know, no one's ever gotten sick. So that was my first exposure. My second, 9/11 in New York, going up to New York after the World Trade Center disasters and dealing with people, and then Katrina and Hurricane Sandy. So there's several disasters I've been in, and when people don't have a house, counseling's the last thing on their mind. So food, shelter, clothing, and social support before counseling, some kind of stability. But so my vision is that people who are providing support, providing shelter, providing housing, have some sensibility to counseling, so that people are being nurtured all along. That would be my goal for training people in dealing with disasters in general. But the counseling component. So if I had a pie, if you could envision a pie, and I put slices in it, and it's like a pie graph or a pie chart. And so I see someone today in July, and we work for a year, and a year from now they're done with counseling, they're really doing much better. What's that pie look like? And so a slice of 10% would be the attitude of the person coming in. So I always ask people, have you ever done this before? And what was your experience? And if they either haven't done it before, but they really think it'll help, or if they've done it before and they've had success, I know I have a piece of that pie intact that I don't have to correct or work against. If they don't want to be there, then they're just a visitor. They're not ready for counseling yet. So I have to make them feel welcome. If they've had a bad experience, I have to analyze what it was and decide whether I can honestly say to them, well, I'm not going to do that with you. But the counselor has to build what we call rapport or a working relationship, and the attitude of the counselee is a significant chunk, but it can be helped if it's not good, and it isn't all of it. So the relationship is significant too. And in simple layman's terms, do you like getting together? Does the counselee like talking to the counselor? Does the counselor like talking to the counselee? Can they appreciate each other? Are they working toward empathy and understanding? And so these are things that have to develop. And so there's 25% of my pie: attitude and relationship. Another 25% is the skill of the counselor. Now we have a half of that pie. So does the counselor know something about marriage and how to recover, and communication, and all the things you'll see in the 4-session marriage counseling video, which, by the way, can only be done in 4 sessions under very specific circumstances, which are described in the video. You don't recover from adultery in 4 sessions. So that leaves 50% of that pie not even touched by the counselor, but we think the biggest elements are relationships that exist, and of course, relationship with God and whatever life circumstances God brings to help move things forward. So what that does is it helps the pastor or counselor accept the limits of our influence. We can only influence so much. And so I consider counseling a success if, in my presence, I'm a good counselor and I do the best that I can and I provide good counsel. You can't set yourself up to judge your success by the marital outcome, because there are so many variables that affect that. Although, as I said, we've established a very good track record in our area here. So recovery from a disaster, I tell everybody, it's 12 months of hard work. There's no way to make it shorter. There certainly are ways to make it longer, but it takes a good 12 months. And it usually begins with discovery, particularly if it's theft, addiction, adultery. That the discovery of it actually creates a traumatic moment for the discoverer. This is an important thing to conceptualize. So the man or woman who has been engaging heavily in pornography, the spouse discovers it. It's a shock to them. It's a threat to them. Seeing the email that begins to suggest a relationship outside of the marriage, the discovery creates a traumatic impact. Trauma memories are stored differently than regular memories, and it is because of trauma, in part, that it takes a year to recover. Every one of the incidences that trigger anniversary stir a little bit of the trauma impact of the whole thing. So discovery is a phase that in adultery recovery lasts as long as until the person feels I've got enough of the history. I really understand what's happened. I don't have to dig for more information. In adultery, in theft, and addiction, often lying, deception makes it a long process. And I always tell people who are confessing something, get it all out now. Don't hold any of it back, because if you're holding something back, it will come out, and then you're starting over with discovery. And discovery is really hard. It's full of pain. It's full of sorrow. It's full of anger. But it's necessary. It's important. And so here's another thing. You can't tell someone in discovery to get over it. You can't tell someone, you should have forgiven by now. After all, it's been 3 months. If discovery is going on, and I've worked with a couple where discovery was 24 months, and that killed the marriage. It was new things kept coming up, and ongoing things kept coming up, and it just killed the marriage. So I tell people, you have to work through discovery. You can't do this alone. That's bullet number 2. And there are many ways to get outside information in. Any man or woman who believes that all they need is me and God is a fool, as defined by Proverbs. You will get bad ideas. And I've played this role myself. We have to have other people speaking wisdom into our life. When I gave this presentation recently in a very large church, person raised their hand and said, I have a big family locally. They're well wise, mature people. Why would I need anybody but family? And my answer was, you are restricted to family wisdom. Why would you not want wisdom from other sources? There will come a time when the family wisdom will be inadequate because God will provide some life experience that reveals this. Why not expand your source of influence so you're taking in information from different sources? So when that happens, you're not just stuck with family wisdom, which could be pretty deep, but it's insufficient. Forgiveness begins as soon as someone decides they're not going to leave. Really, it does. But it's the very basic statement, you deserve death, but I will not harm you. And I actually have people turn to each other at some point in the counseling and say, repeat after me, you deserve death, but I will not harm you. Going both ways. That's just our position before Christ. God, through Christ, forgives us, redeems us, and will not destroy us. So there's a discovery phase. These are actual phases. Discovery, building a social network, setting new boundaries in place, thinking through what does forgiveness mean. And forgiveness doesn't mean forget. It actually means I am willing to endure change with you to create something good and new. But I'm not foolishly going to just automatically believe that's going to happen. But we're going to walk through this over time with a guide, counselor, pastor, friend. And then autopsy of the marriage is necessary in all circumstances. And so something has killed the marriage, and I believe a divorce decree is really just a certificate of death for a marriage that's died. And so you sift through the rubble, and you decide, oh, here's something of value. I think we want to take that forward. This, we don't want anything. Let's get rid of this. And you actually decide what is value that moves forward, and what do we have to build new. And we do it very systematically. I go through systems of finance, sexuality, relationship, friendship, communication. I use the same elements you'll see in the little structured interview. I call it the marriage assessment. I use those to structure many kinds of dialogue, and one of them is the autopsy of the marriage. There's certain painful moments in counseling. Processing the discovery is always painful. This is what happened. Getting the initial confessions out, very painful. And certain elements of the autopsy can be very painful. And so it's very important for the helpers to be full of hope and to be able to validate their experience. By validate, I mean, yes, this happens. But when people are trying to recover, doubt comes in, fear comes in, sorrow comes in. But we're able to really impress hope. I'll help you work through it. God will help you work through it. We'll do this together. You are not alone. Those are all huge messages for helping people move through. Establishing new boundaries, goals, and habits stem right from some of the skill set that I'll expose you to in a minute. Are we communicating better? Are we managing our conflict better? Are we managing our finances better? Are we committing time to our relationship? These are boundaries. A friend of mine is a recovering cocaine addict, and he's older than me. He's been in recovery for decades. He's had a couple relapses, and one of them occurred. I met with him and his wife, and we were just talking about this. I said, I bet you have specific boundaries in place, procedures in place that create safety for you and your wife. He said, absolutely. I never carry more than $10 in my pocket. There are certain parts of town I never go to, and I stick by this real religiously. And I said to her, and I bet you keep an eye on that. Oh, absolutely. I haven't turned his pockets out to make sure what he's carrying. So my point is, trust is contextual, and trust exists in appropriate boundaries with appropriate accountability, so that people feel safe. We renew commitments, sometimes formally with vows exchanged, sometimes informally, but it isn't a one-time event. And I encourage people to speak of their commitment on a daily basis. I love you. I'm committed. I'm going to choose to behave myself today. These are very concrete, simple statements that are absolutely necessary. And then it's do we live in a healthy community? Is the health of our community such that it would support a healthy marriage? And there's a line from 12-step recovery for alcoholics: new faces, new places. In order to change my behavior, do I need to just change my social network? And so these elements, I think, are all significantly important to see that people move through constructively. Now, we have what we call the Eden method, and you'll get exposed to that if you watch the 4-session marriage counseling, which, by the way, I am willing to provide in this context. It will. One of the things I wrestle with is it better to in the beginning show several topics, giving people a kind of a sample of things, or is it better to dive in to something and spend several months sort of picking it apart? And you're going to get a survey very soon after this is done. Tell me what you think. Tell me what you would like, because you will shape how we move forward. But right from the beginning, I do a romance builders exercise. I'll show you the list in just a minute. We work on increasing positive communication, decreasing negative. I teach them problem solving so they can fix a few things. And not until we have that going do I actually start working on improving communication. Research shows you can help people to communicate better. They'll still communicate about negativity in such a fashion that it actually kills the relationships. There's a reason for this sequence, which I explain in the longer training. We focus on three things: time, attention, and touch. These are three things that in the American culture are lacking, and my observation of the Romanian culture, they are lacking. Not to sound judgmental of another culture, but between the ages of 7 and 10 is a window of time where human beings need a lot of time, attention, and appropriate touch. And they're not getting it. And so what happens is addictions form during this window of time when a child who's experiencing some kind of distress discovers something that improves mood. Could be pornography, could be food, could be the accolade of peers that causes them to strive to please people all their lives. It could be tasting someone's alcohol, getting a sample of some drugs. But it serves the purpose of changing my mood and my perspective, and so I keep doing it. And I'm not going to spend much time on this. There's another presentation on the evolution of and the development of addiction. But that's its root. So what's the solution? If there is one, it is to see that 7 to 10-year-olds get enough time, attention, and touch. And so the deficit of that leads to adult deficits later in life. Men in America are raised to eroticize their need for touch. We are now, when I was a kid, no men hugged anybody. That just didn't happen. There are other cultures where men are much more free to embrace, to walk arm in arm, to have appropriate touch from men. So American men my age were pretty much forced to eroticize all their touch. It's all sexualized. That's a problem for people. And so we want to raise people who can have appropriately bounded time, attention, and touch throughout their whole lifespan. Confession, forgiveness, reconciliation. I have a 5-step model for forgiveness, and dismantling landmines has to do with those things that are really explosive. So the tools, which are discussed in the 4-session marriage counseling, are listed here. And I'll just briefly, most of them are kind of simple to conceptualize. It's just a matter of getting people to do it. Romance builders, I take a piece of paper, I write down, I feel loved and cared about when you ... I feel loved and cared about when you ... I invite each person to list 12 specific somethings, activities, words that the spouse could do to create love. They exchange lists. We make sure they're all positive, all very specific, and their assignment is to do 2 per day for the rest of your life. The anger expression scale is an exercise where I have people use numbers to rate the intensity of their anger, and we teach timeout and prayerful approaches to reduce negativity. So if you go back to the previous slide, increase positive, decrease negative. That's the first step in any counseling once you've built rapport, once you've built relationship. Brainstorming is a model. And all these handouts, you can go to, if you just want to look at the handouts, just go to edencounseling.com and take a look at them. But it's a simple model of problem solving. EVE is an acronym for communication, echo, validate, empathy. It's an active listening model. And then I just recently devised that there has to be training in what I'm calling rational and emotional messages. And so just in the last couple of years to EVE, I've added this concept of emotional and rational contexts and a non-judgmental stance. And we have an exercise to train in being non-judgmental. Distractions are those things that are draining the marriage. Just this week, yesterday I said to my wife, we're renovating bathrooms, we're landscaping, we're refinishing the deck. And at Eden, I'm training new staff, I'm creating new structures. And yesterday I was just tired. And I said, you know what? Let's take this and push it back 2 months. So let's reduce distraction by what we can. That's distraction. The 5-point confession, I'll just run through it with you. You can look it up. And we can expand on any of these in future training. Here's what I did. Here's why it's bad for you. Here's why it's bad for me. Here's what I'm doing so it will never happen again. And here's restitution if it's possible. And so these 5 points, when they are thought through, and I have people write them out and present them, um, what I'm going to do so it'll never happen again is very substantial. It shows that I'm putting effort into behaving differently. All these things are very critical. And then the search for safety and safety days training has to do with dismantling landmines, teaching people how to talk about when both people tend to be really evoked emotionally. How can we just, calm down and listen one to another? So those are the Eden tools. They're illustrated online in handouts, and they're illustrated in the training for session marriage counseling. And if you would like me to do that training, just tell me in the feedback. Um, we have evolved several methods of intervention that I just wanted to briefly share with you. Um, uh, I am made up of a team. Our intensives contain counselors, pastors, and health professionals of various disciplines. We bring people on site for between 3 and 21 days, and then we follow up for 12 months. This is a great kickstart, and the concepts could be modified to other environments. We have the Eden method, but this idea of immersing people in a different culture for a little while, there are different ways to do that, and we can talk about that too as we move forward. But I love doing this because we see this statistically miraculous outcome where people are just so surrounded by truth and the love of God and wise counsel that they can't help but embrace moving forward. We've taken some horrendous marriages. We've lost a couple, but by far we're doing great when we launch interventions with this model. These are usually people not from Southeastern Virginia. These are usually people coming in from the outside to do this. And so as we wrap up here, this is just a powerful reality. For lack of guidance, a nation falls. You could insert, for lack of guidance, a marriage falls, but victory is won through many advisors. And so marriage mentors, pre-marriage counseling, which we talked about last time, counseling, peer mentors, people who have been through it and just willing to hold your hand and pray you through. And let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good works. Not criticize, not demand, not correct, but the authentic example of and testimony of what God has done. Let us encourage one another with stories that are wonderful stories, which means we have to create a culture where people don't have to be ashamed that they made mistakes in the past. Here's what I did. Here's what God has taken me. That's a powerful message that has to be part of our culture. Otherwise, church has no relevance to young people. This is what we're seeing in America. Church has no relevance to young people. Not all young people, but we're seeing this huge movement. And Romania will probably see this too if media has the same kind of impact, if the older generations don't figure out how to create an authentic, transparent, godly leadership. Again, not to be sort of negativistic looking forward, but if we can look at another culture and have a cautionary word, let's do it. Let's try to figure out how to do it differently. I threw this up just in case I had more time to go into more detail about the Eden tools, which I don't. We're about ready to wrap up. This is an example of a powerful marriage program to be able to have people trained in the overall counseling method, to understand how to do premarital counseling and mentoring, and to actually develop this in a church takes a year. Pretty intensive focus. So your organization has to be mature in other areas to decide this is going to be a focus, because typically, the counsel. I appreciate that my position in partner churches is really small. I mean, teaching, preaching, classes, education, program development. That's the bulk of a pastor's time. But nonetheless, this is really important to certain individuals within your organization. So that's why we devote the time to doing this. So we're coming here to an end. I would invite anyone who wishes to ask a question. Either type a question. I don't have any at this point, so I'm hoping that there are about 10 of us here in this meeting. I'm hoping that we're either making sense or you're saving up your questions, but feel free to release them now. Does anyone have a comment or a question to ask?
I have a question. Can you hear me, Dr. Paul?
Well done. Yes, I leave you. Please do.
You mentioned that being in isolation doesn't work.
Correct.
Indeed.
Yes.
But are there some intentional, active steps or acts that a counselor or a pastor can do to approach somebody to come out of this isolation stage?
Yes, good question. Uh, Depending on the size of your organization, and Leave you have a relatively small organization, so probably as you're developing the culture of your church, it would probably be up to you to try to find ways to engage the people that you're concerned about. So I would see whatever point of connection the person has with your organization, that's a key. That's a key person, and so the leader, either him or herself, tries to engage. Maybe let's just meet for coffee. How about if you and digital communication is great. Simply texting someone on a daily basis reduces isolation. So
Mm-hmm.
using technology for regular contact, and then just prayerfully thinking, who else can help this person? Who do I know in my community that either will empathize, will like them, they're maybe similar in some way. And so sometimes the isolation or the breaking isolation isn't even focusing on the problem. I know that this person likes to fix cars. My friend over here isn't a counselor, but just having him connect in our community would have value. I'm going to introduce them. Maybe they would like to just have a coffee and talk about cars, which gives him a break from his problems, but a friend that who may what God will do with that. So I think personal invitations to communicate, and then you have to protect yourself, not get too overburdened. But I find that I invite almost anybody. Text me. That's easy. Email me. That's easy. With episodic face to face, and then looking to link them to others. And then in those of you that have larger established organizations where you have cell group and so on, you're looking to try to find the right fit. So this person doesn't stand alone. Does that help at all, Leave you?
Yes, so the key is actually a lot of fellowship, bringing people or drawing into fellowship.
That's right. But it's a fellowship,
Okay.
but it's a fellowship that you're influencing so people can increase transparency.
Okay.
A lot of people get together, but they stay very surface. And so you want to be developing people who are willing to just, in America, we're much more blunt than what I observe in Romania. So, I just kind of take it upon myself to say, I heard that you're having a tough time. You want to talk about it? If that's too
Okay.
direct, if that's too direct, then I would have to first build more relationship. And then one thing that I do is I tell stories about me. Um,
Mhm.
and now I have one about divorce with a family member. So oh, you're having a
Mhm.
tough time with your marriage. I just went through this with my son. That kind of personal transparency is very endearing to most people. You have to be careful as a pastor because some people expect the pastor to be perfect, and you have to figure
Yeah.
out, what you can do with that. But so it's asking God for discernment as to how to share of my testimony so that people can see the power of God in my life. Because another thing that people struggle with is that they don't have models of success. Like they can't say, "Oh, I want to be like that person." They just have disaster,
Yeah.
and so what they do is they pursue media and pleasure and kind of escapist stuff. So I think effective leadership requires strategic transparency, either mine or somebody else's, so people can say, "Ah, that's a story I want to follow. I want to identify." So I think fellowship, yes, with these little nuances of trying to make people connect at a deeper level. Great question. Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Thank you. Yeah. I like the word strategic transparency.
Yeah,
That's good.
yeah. Well, you can't be foolish, you know.
Yeah.
A leader can sort of disqualify him or herself by being foolishly transparent. I really think everything we do has to have, I use the word strategy. You could use the word God directed. I mean, there's different ways to conceptualize that,
Yes.
but we're not just acting impulsively. We have reason for what we're doing. Yeah. Thank you. That was
Yes.
good.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? We've gone past the hour. If those of you that need to go, you're welcome to go. But if you have a question, I have a few more minutes. Any other questions?
There's a question that's posted, Dr. Paul, on the
Oh,
chat.
I see that question.
Cornell said, can you explain more detailed what engagement of the mind means in terms of
I'll be
happiness?
happy to do that. And there are some more extensive trainings on this. It has to do with thinking about one thing for a longer period of time. So in my life, I'm engaging my mind when I sit alone and begin to write. I'm thinking about one topic. I may be thinking about it in different ways, but I'm not thinking about the runny faucet, the business, this or that. Um, my work really, when I'm counseling somebody, that's heavily engaging. I'm talking with one person for 45 minutes at a time. as long as I don't let my mind wander. So what I was trying to make a difference between was having your attention go to many different directions in a short period of time versus doing one thing for a longer period of time. Here's an example with eating. When I'm teaching this to people, I will take a raisin. I happen to have a dried cherry right here. So I would take this dried cherry, and the other party would take one, and we would take 7 minutes. Well, this is big. I might take 10 minutes to eat this cherry, and I'm doing it illustratively. I'm having us. If you can see me now, I'm looking at it. I can see where light reflects on the shiny places, and there are shadows, and I'm feeling it, and I can smell it, and so I do all this external stuff. Then I lay it on my tongue, and I let my saliva hydrate it, and I inhale and I smell it and I feel it and I roll it around until after several minutes I actually take two teeth and bite it and let the juices begin to come into my mouth and feel the change in shape. And it's very intentional and focused. And this kind of this is an extreme example. I'm just talking about like when I counsel, but if you're teaching somebody this has powerful curative impact on many disorders. People with attention deficit can get better if they practice this sort of thing 3 times a day. Anxious people, depressed people. The techniques are as old as mankind, but mindfulness, uh, meditating on God's word, praying with, with a method that allows us to just calm ourselves and listen to a simple meditative prayer, for example, is to take a passage of scripture and just say it as you exhale. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. As I'm doing this meditative scriptural recitation, in the gaps, I'm simply thinking about scripture. What am I going to say next? I'm slowing my pace down. I am contemplating the images that this creates in my mind. So this is a spiritual discipline exercise showing a mindfulness or an engagement of the mind approach. We can eat mindfully by inhaling, by looking, by tasting. It expands the enjoyment of the moment and is a healing component on the actual brain function itself. So I don't know if that's helpful, Cornell, but that's a little bit of elaboration on that. So I want to be true to those of you that have scheduled this for an hour, and I need to get on myself. This is being recorded. We will post this recording. You'll receive a survey quickly. Mirabella has helped me with that, and I thank you for joining me. Lord, I ask that you bless those that have come today and those that they know, and that we can be agents of healing and peace and growth and development. Work first in us, and may that overflow to those that know us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. God bless you all. We're going to try to get a schedule out so you know in advance what's happening. A lot going on, so I appreciate your time and attention today. Farewell.
Bye. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.